This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze, Your Special. We are all in the maze of life, but some of us have additional needs. Some of us have additional needs as family members. Some of us have additional needs as individuals. I am the proud mother of two boys and the proud wife of a man who is on the spectrum, as is my younger son. And I will say that nobody ever told me what life was going to be like. Um, and I will tell you, it's been challenging, but exciting and rewarding. My guest today is Sonia, and we've been brought together by some wonderful people in this world who know your worth and mine. And I'm going to ask you to tell us your story and also, when you get around to it, your podcast and your book, because I think that's going to be helpful to all of our listeners. So, welcome.
Well, thank you very much for having me on here today.
So,
Um, so about me, I was diagnosed back in 2002 when I turned 20 that year. I was diagnosed with being for what is formerly known as Asperger's syndrome, now known as autism spectrum disorder with least support needs, um, and or otherwise known as high functioning autism. I grew up in a feeling very confused and not understanding why I was always the one getting in trouble. Why was I always the one kind of othered, feeling othered, left out, having difficulty with friendships? I never really was able to organically make a lot of friends. And I grew up, uh, also, I got bullied a lot as well, and both by teachers and by peers, and sadly, even by some therapists that I had to see when I was growing up. Um, I think that a lot of ignorance and misunderstanding of anybody who was different, especially back then, because I grew up in the late 80s, or like all throughout the 90s, when you're at that, uh, those decades, especially, anybody different was considered a bad person, right? So, and people didn't understand autism really back then. People didn't understand what neurodivergence was. So, growing up, I failed second grade because I could never understand what school was about. I could never get my stuff together. I had a specific way that I was learning, and I'm a very literal learner. And it was hard for me to keep going with the flow every day in a school setting at first because it was long days. It was, I had to deal with a lot of people all day, and also, I had a cranky teacher, and the teacher bullying really picked up when I got to second grade. So my first and second grade year, I went to a parochial school in the town I was living in at the time. And the teacher bullying really picked up. One day we were asked to pull out a paper worksheet, and it had been something we were supposed to have held on to for a while and keep in our desk. I didn't have it that day. And the teacher came over and looked at my desk. And the next thing I knew, she picked up the desk and dumped out the contents on the floor. And I was basically forced in front of the whole class to get down on my knees and pick up the pieces and start putting my desk together. I remember looking around the room when she did that, and I saw people like their mouth agape, flabbergasted looks, like people were, had that expression of, did this really just happen? And I was, singled out that way. This wasn't the first time that had happened. It happened again when I redid second grade at a public school, but this time it was done before I got to the homeroom. I remember when I was walking to the classroom, a few of the classmates who went in the room before me, they were like, "Whoa!" They kind of made gasping sound as if something had happened. And then when I walked in, I saw a whole bunch of stuff on the floor. And as I got closer to my desk, I realized it was my stuff.
Wow.
And I saw my homeroom teacher, and it wasn't done by my homeroom teacher. It was done by the reading teacher I had at that time. But that reading teacher was always a very angry lady, very angry all the time. I wonder if she had maybe perhaps an addiction because of her unstable moods that she walked in with at school, and always angry all the time, always quick to snap. I never rarely ever saw her in a good mood. She used to threaten kids. I will take care of you if you guys don't stop horsing around, and you won't like the way I personally take care of you. That would be like her. That was a direct quote I heard from
Right.
her one time to other people. She came in the room in the doorway, and so I was, once again, same situation, got down on my knees, picked up the pieces to put it back in my desk, the contents rather. And she came in the doorway and was screaming and accused me of her stuff being in my desk, which I never remember taking. And she was just very, yeah, she was one of those people, very volatile, very hostile. And I wonder if perhaps she had some alcohol problem, now that I think of, that she had to be that way every day or something. So, um, and my homeroom teacher, I remember she looked that morning, her face, I will never forget this. She looked as if she was a scared puppy, a puppy that had just been reprimanded for peeing on the carpet, right?
Wow.
This is the kind of face that the teacher had. She gave me a coy smile. She looked rather scared, like saddened, ashamed. And I was just thinking to myself, what happened that morning between those two, that the teacher, even the teacher, my homeroom teacher, got in that state. And I seriously, I don't know what kept me to stay in the classroom, but I wanted to run away. I kept thinking, oh my God, I want out of here. Like I wanted to go run out the front doors and just run and not come back to school, because I didn't feel safe there, and of course, kids were also very rude as well. So, and I was never the type to be able to fit in. I was never the type to, struggled socially. And my parents had to help a little bit with my friendship making growing up, but it only went so far. There were people that they try to facilitate friendships with, but some of the girls were just so mean. And it was just a theme. We moved towns after I finished second grade, and I was under that false belief that, what, if I tried hard, I'd make friends. And I used to call people's homes. And it was at that time when you could get people's numbers from the yellow pages,
Right. Yep.
or you can call 411 and get a number, right?
Right.
I got a lot of, I used to call people's homes, but then it was to a point where I remember when I look back, classmates would be like, why are you calling? What'd you call me for? What'd you call me for? And, um, and as I reflect back at that time, I didn't realize this, but they never really liked me in the first place. So why would, why would they want me to call them? Right. So made sense. Um, and things, so even when I moved towns after second grade, and um, school really came to a head in sixth grade where um, a lot of my efforts to try to fit in didn't work. And in between, so in sixth grade, how in your typical middle school, you have different
Right.
teachers, classes.
Tough years. Yes.
Yes. So in so my sixth and seventh period were reading in English. I remember that. And we had the same teacher for those classes in sixth grade. All sixth graders had the same teacher when it came to their reading and English classes. And so during passing period one day, I was bored. And because, a lot of times people just go hang out with their friends during passing periods. I was bored and I was standing by the teacher's desk, and um I made up this cheer about a guy I had a crush on at the time. And um people laughed. They saw it and laughed, and I felt good at the moment because I'm like, okay, I'm getting some traction here. And it started becoming a repertoire eventually, because the next day after I finished eating lunch, I went outside to go get some fresh air. And because they let people go in the back of the cafeteria, there was a door that led to basketball courts and a parking lot and things. And so people were allowed to go outside and go on the grass and go play basketball or dodgeball or whatever. So I was outside getting air, and one girl came up to me and goes, "Hey, Sonia, do your thing that you were doing yesterday, that cheer." I said, "What cheer?" And she did the arm movements, and it came back to me. She was like, "Hold on, let me get my friends." Those friends happen to be part of the popular group. And pretty soon I started having an entourage. The guy that I made the cheer up about started watching. At first, he was embarrassed and told me to stop, but then he started joining in with everybody else that was asking for it. And uh, I started eventually getting in trouble after a football game. What happened is I was in a band, school band. I played the flute, and the band had an opportunity to go do a color guard routine for the high school football team halftime show. And I did the color guard routine. And after we were finished, I was standing by the bleachers and my mom was putting away her camera. Now, mind you, this was the year 1994, 1995. That was my sixth grade academic year. So this is fall of 94. Of course, no cell phones back then with cameras, right? So um, she had the camcorder. So she was putting it back in that case that looked like a suitcase practically. And she was disassembling it and everything. And the whole bunch of guys came up from my grade, came up to me and goes, "Hey, Sonia, do your cheer, do it now." And then they started going in unison, "Do it, do it, do it, do it." And then my mom had to come over there and she asked them to leave me alone and they left. But then she asked me, "Hey, Sonia, what is this do it now business?" And I told her nothing. I said, "Oh, mom, it was nothing. Don't worry about it." And she knew better than to believe me. So she called the assistant principal that Monday. And the assistant principal said, "Okay, I'm going to find out who these people are, but you have to also understand one thing. Your daughter enjoys acting out for people." And my mom didn't, of course, approve of that. Teachers started intervening at that point after, they were telling them to, it was basically the special ed teacher and her paraprofessionals that would tell people to leave me alone. Um, and I just ended up getting very depressed. I felt like, all the efforts that I tried to make so far to try to make friends didn't work out. The friendships I had in elementary school that I thought would last didn't last because of my crying behaviors, my meltdowns. I didn't know how to handle things socially. I used to take everything very seriously, very literally. I always used to think if people are mean to me, I'm a bad person.
Right.
I was scared because you know what? Everybody else kept connecting. Felt like I was being left behind and alone. And I used to cry a lot because I didn't know how to handle all of it. I didn't have the social
Sure.
skills. I didn't. And um, and as a way to try to win over friends at that point, during that time, like from like fourth grade on up, like so fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh grade, I would try to win over friends by having birthday parties. And a lot of the people who came to my birthday party would never invite me back, right? I was barely ever invited to any birthday parties back. So that's the way I would try to win over friends. And at that point, I was like, you know what, this sucks. And I started thinking about and talking about suicide a lot. And my first time I felt any ideation per se was in fifth grade when we did a camping trip. The school did a field trip where we
Right.
had to go and spend the night on a camping ground. And there were campfire skits we were assigned to do. And then afterwards, the principal said, "Okay, you have a choice of either going back to the cabins or going up for a walk along the forest preserve with me and some chaperones and like forest preserve the personnel." So we all went for a walk. And I remember I was walking kind of by myself. The guy that I had a crush on that I started cheering about in sixth grade, he was walking ahead of me with his friends. A lot of people at that point had made it clear they didn't want me around their groups. So I was kind of alone walking. And then I started saying, "I hate myself" out loud. And I remember the guy turned around and he goes, "Hey, Sonia, do you want to kill yourself?" I said, "Yeah." And then I said, "I want to kill myself because that's how much I hate myself." I screamed it. And instead of getting any kind of support and being like, Sonia, anyone asking, "Hey, Sonia, are you okay?" People are like, "Can you just stop it?" just shut up, Sonia. That was the answer. And I remember I looked at the moon. I saw it was a full moon that night. It was like stars in the sky, just beautiful, beautiful sky. And I was like, you know what? I could live up there with the planets. And I think that for me, and like I live with the moons, live with the stars. I thought, because I felt like that's where people go after they die anyway. That's where, that age. And so I was like, but and then I started thinking how nice it would be. And those images of that night sky in sixth grade started coming back a lot. Then I started talking about fake attempts because I was just so embarrassed. I was so ashamed. I, didn't know, how to show up anymore at that school. And I was so embarrassed. And I think a lot of that too was I was just desperately trying in any way I can to get friends.
And from what you're telling me, so my son was diagnosed in 96, so a little bit past what you were, okay? And it was still brand new. Um, and I think the sad part is because people didn't understand it, teachers were not trained, even doctors,
No,
were grasping at straws as to what was going on. Um, it not only made you feel worthless, but your family felt worthless, I'm assuming, because I know I did. You know, I gave birth to this child. This child was normal until one day he was considered not. And yet, as I listened to your story, it it sounds like if people would have been nicer to you, you would have been happier. But because you were confused, they they use that against you.
yeah, they used that against me because, well, they didn't understand. I also didn't understand I was on the spectrum either. I didn't even know what autism was back then. You could say that word and it would go way past my head back then because I didn't even know about it. Even in high school, I heard about it. I started hearing about that word, autism. And then I did some research about it, but it was not a lot of research. But then when I started learning about Asperger's, that's when everything started making sense. You know, so to backtrack a little bit here, so I basically had to take a leave of absence in sixth grade where I had to go get a psychiatric evaluation. And instead of really being in like an IOP or a PHP, partial hospitalization program, where I could have worked on emotions, I could have learned some social skills, I could have learned communication assertiveness, managing emotions, how do you handle people, right? Things like that. I was left a lot at home and I went to the doctor for medication. Basically I got prescribed. First they prescribed me I think some Prozac, but then they changed my medication to lithium and that was a very, very strong medication. And I had to take that twice a day because what ended up happening is when I got back to school after the 2 week leave of absence, the school already had a whole list sheet of observations of my behaviors. And what happened is that the school on the first meeting, they were like, okay, we want Sonia out of the school because we want her to go to a school for troubled children, basically. And they were telling my parents that they would bus me for free and I would be better off suited at their school because I wasn't that township school material, basically. And I wasn't able to handle a regular school. They didn't think I was fit. And my dad basically had to beg them one more week, give her one more week. And so what happened is they took notes of that meeting. And then, sure enough, the next meeting happened a week after. The psychiatrist had to come and advocate on my behalf. And then what ended up is that in order for me to stay at that school, they put me under restriction. So basically, my rights were taken from me. I was basically, for all practical purposes, I was treated like a prisoner in plain clothes,
Yep.
except no handcuffs, no shackles, none of that, no orange jumpsuit, none of that. So when I got to school, I had to go first thing, report to what the special ed room, what they used to call the resource room. And then I'd have to wait till after the bell rang. And then 5 minutes after the bell rang, the paraprofessional or the special ed teacher would take me to my locker, let me get my stuff, and then would escort me to class. 5 minutes before the bell rang, I'd be picked up from class. And I was not allowed to be in the halls during passing periods. I was not allowed to eat in the cafeteria. Um, I was not able to, really socialize anymore with anybody. Their reasoning behind that is they wanted to get me off people's minds. But truth of the matter is, everybody would know when you walk in late to a
Sure.
class.
Yeah,
People would know that you're getting escorted out of class. And I remember there was a time we had a substitute teacher for gym class, and I remember the teacher asked, they go, "Hey, Sonia, why does the special ed teacher have to come after you?" And I mean, it was really embarrassing, right? That a substitute teacher had to ask that kind of question for you, and um, so basically what that led to was more alienation, right? And other because you know what, now you're getting treated in a way where kids know you're getting treated in a certain way. And um, I was not allowed to eat in the cafeteria. And of course, kids are going to know, oh, we don't see Sonia in the cafeteria, right? Like people are going to know. And so if they thought that they were doing a job of taking me off people's minds, if anything, they were doing the complete opposite. They were actually just highlighting the
exactly.
deficiency even that much more. Right. And so
How did
basically
how did
short.
your parents feel about this at the time? Because obviously, again, there was no true diagnosis, but you're a troublemaker. But were you a troublemaker at home?
No. I mean, my parents did have a problem with me in terms of getting me to try new foods. Like I was very fixated on certain foods.
Sure.
It took me a long time from when I was an infant to get off baby food and eat table food. Now, that was an issue. And then I'd get really fixated on a certain kind of food. And that's one thing my parents found problematic. But I mean, the extent of it. It was never like I ever was like a troublemaker, um, in the sense of, that it was like getting punished for things or anything
Sure.
like that. Um, I know my parents hired a tutor for me. So my fourth grade teacher ended up becoming my tutor, because I struggled a bit academically with things. But I mean, I got better with time because I figured out a system that worked for me. And as I, just delved more into my academics, but because but I think a lot of this also was contingent. And my parents, when they were, talk about how they felt about the whole thing, I think my parents didn't know any better and they were forced to succumb to agreements from the school,
Absolutely.
not because of want, because they felt it was a survival technique, right? And because they didn't want me to go to a school for troubled children where I would be stigmatized even more,
Right.
right? But the thing is, they also didn't realize that the stigmatizing was already bad enough where it was, right? So, and it was just like the bullying picked up after, and I was left friendless, and I remember when I started my high school years, I went to a therapist who went a little bit beyond her scope of practice. I think she meant well, but she tried to facilitate a friendship with another classmate whom she knew. And because of they were family friends. And that friendship did not work out. And there's a lot of miscommunication, a lot of things being said about me. And a lot of times when I would be over at that family friend's, that at that person's home rather, a lot of questions would be asked about my past. And I didn't want to talk about it. And it got to a point where she thought I had too many insecurities. Well, I did. And certain things that were said to me I felt were not necessary, right? And so basically this therapist turned on me, basically called me attention seeking, she would tell me what my classmates used to say about me behind my back because a lot of classmates used to go to her for professional help. And the fact that she was okay with them talking about me, the fact that they knew I went to her, right? The fact that they, were,
Unethical.
huh?
That was not ethical on her part. Uh,
No. And she called me attention seeking. And the last time I saw her, because I had a meltdown at school, she told me, you know what? She told me I was not worthy of having as a friend.
wow.
So, I mean, and here's the thing, she knew she could get away with it because she was Indian. And my parents being Indian, right? They didn't do it. She knew that she could get away with it because my parents wouldn't do anything about it, right? And so she was able to abuse her power like that and abuse her PhD, right? So, I mean,
Right.
this is kind of the thing. She had a title, and the fact that she could have doctorate, Indians would like they live, breathe, and die for that title, right? If we're just being honest here, a lot of Indians are like that, and there's some very successful doctors who are Indian. Don't get me wrong, but like, you know what? The fact that somebody's a doctor, oh my God, they're like the next thing to kiss Earth, right? Like,
Yeah,
for an Indian standard, right? So I just don't think that, and I think that's the thing. My parents wouldn't do anything about it.
sure. So when did you start to come into your own? And because obviously you're doing very well now. Um, we already know that you're an author and you have a podcast, and sharing your story is so important because even with all the breakthroughs in autism, I don't care what name we give it, whether it's Asperger's or high functioning, uh, it doesn't make any difference. Autism has some disconnects, but all people have disconnects, whether
Sure.
they're on the spectrum or not. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. And so for people to bully another person because they learn differently, they think differently, they walk differently, that's ridiculous. And,
Sure.
and hopefully we can start getting better at the anti-bullying. But in your case, being bullied by teachers and doctors is it's just not acceptable. So what are you doing now to help others not have to face some of the things that you went through?
Well, I started coming more into my own, I think, when I was in my 30s. Before I was just kind of walking this path that I felt I needed to walk in order to be accepted, right? And to get a seat at the table. And one of that was, my parents really pushed me to go to law school, and they pushed and pushed and pushed. And I was not happy in law school. I never wanted to be a lawyer. Actually, I kind of knew it was a bad idea when I was working in a law firm. I never really enjoyed it. I mean, I think I took solace in the fact that because I went back to an environment that broke me right after college.
Sure.
And I didn't want to be back in that environment. And I think I took solace in finding a home at work because I didn't have a social life and I kind of depended on them to make me feel like a family away from home. Um, but at the same time, I just wasn't happy. Like something wasn't clicking. I was always more interested. And I had to brainwash myself to believe that psychology was boring or something because I needed to try to get in the mindset that I needed to do law and just not distract me. I didn't realize how brainwashed I was until I got to step outside and reflect back. And I mean, I went through law school. I tried to like law. I moved to New York City and got like an LLM in financial services. I worked on Wall Street, did all that, but I did not, you know what? I couldn't stand it. I remember I was excited when I first got the job
Sure.
at my first job I got at Bank of America. But after a while, the happiness just faded. I was miserable. I was depressed. I had family out in New York City, and I kind of clung on to them a bit for just emotional needs or whatever, like in terms of just going and having an outlet, just visiting them, seeing family. But it took, but with a lot of resistance. I was met with a lot of resistance when I finally decided I'm going to leave the field, and from family and, well, my parents mainly. And my mom was more understanding. My dad was not. He's like, you're going from law to being a therapist. And but I'll tell you this, when I changed careers, it was the best thing for me. I'm helping people, now I'm giving them therapy that I wish I got to have growing up. I mean, I had some great therapists after, I had, in fact, if it wasn't for that therapist, I started seeing my junior year of high school to going into my sophomore year of college, I would not have been properly diagnosed. And that therapist urged me to go get psychologically tested. And it was especially after when I became a freshman and I went to the local college before transferring to a main branch. I went to a local community college for the first year, and she kept saying, oh, you should get psychologically tested because I think there's something going on here that we're not picking up on. And she used to notice some things I used to do, like talk about certain things and just go on and on and on and on and on and on about it during the sessions. And she's like, and some of the things that she thought might be preventing me from connecting with others, she just noticed my fixations, just my strong, intense interests, just my repetitive patterns. And I went and got tested, and they took it for further evaluation. So they said, okay, this falls along the lines of, you know, uh, on the outset, the doctor said, I'm referring you to a neuropsych, but this falls along the lines of maybe perhaps a nonverbal learning disability, but this needs further investigation because it also looks like you could be on the spectrum here. And sure enough, when I went to that neuropsychologist after after summer school, going into my sophomore year of college, I did summer school at the main campus. I took some feedback what I got from people there about things I've done and I didn't realize I was doing. And she was like, you know what, this sounds like Asperger. And I was finally relieved. And it was like a celebration for me to finally get a diagnosis and get that get get the right thing going for myself, if you will.
You know, there's good therapy and there's bad therapy, and I'm sure you understand that. My son, from the age of 6 until the age of maybe 17, 18, um, had terrible therapy. He would come home and he'd say, you think I'm going to do that? There's no way. And I go, well, why didn't you discuss that with the therapist? And he'd go, they're treating me like a dog. I didn't understand it because I thought I was doing the right thing. As mom, I'm sending him to therapy and he's, going through it. But it wasn't until he was in his early 20s and he went to cognitive therapy. That's when he started to put it all together. And it sounds like sort of what you did too. It was like, okay, I have this diagnosis, but the diagnosis doesn't have to shape me. I can now start to piece these things together and I can try to find me and be the best version of myself. And it sounds like that's what you decided to do, even though you went to law school. Okay. Um, you thought maybe you were pleasing yourself because you were pleasing family.
Right.
But I think when you finally made that decision that, you know what, it's not what I want to do.
Mm.
I want to help other people because when you're helping other people, you're helping yourself. And that's one of the reasons that I do the podcast and I do coaching because I'm not on the spectrum, but I'm married to a man who didn't know that until he was in his 50s, and to a young son who didn't know it for the first 6 years. And then the school drilled it into his head. Oh, you're on the spectrum. Oh, you're different.
Mm.
And he had to find a way to say, you know what? I may be different, but I'm still me. And that's what I see that you're doing. And I think that is so commendable because you had to find those tools on your own.
Well, thank you so much for the kind words and the encouragement. And, I'm also very proud of, your son and your family too, for also advocating that message that autism doesn't mean that we're less than or less human than someone else, or we are, or that we should be just treated as substandard, right? And I think, unfortunately, a lot of times when you're on the spectrum, at least I feel, there are people who will try to think you're dumb or will try to be your friend for wrong reasons,
Right.
right? Whether it's to control you because they think that you're beneath them, or they will try to use you in some way, shape, or form. And they don't see you for you. I think they see you as somebody who, as long as you're beneath them, right, and serving their needs, that's all good. But truth of the matter is, people on the spectrum are not stupid. They're
Right.
highly intelligent. Um, they know how to handle themselves. They know how to figure things out. They have a remarkable ability to research and learn. I feel like there's so many positives about people on the autism spectrum. I have learned so much from others on the spectrum that some of my clients, like I learned a lot about like the GDP from him. I learned about a lot of like history from him because that's one of his interests. And I think that um, the more that uh, people can start to see past the label, I think you find really golden nuggets. Really, that's where it all lies,
Absolutely.
past the label. I really feel that way. And that's one thing I try to teach to all my clients, whether they're on the spectrum or not, that your challenge doesn't define everything about you. It does not, there's so much to you. There's different parts of ourselves that we have, right? And I think that it's so important that people understand, right? That a label is not everything. Like somebody could have diabetes, but guess what? They can be running marathons. Somebody could be also the same person with diabetes could hold a job,
Right.
could go and work out, could go and have a family, could, have pets, right? Like there's so many different pieces to them. They may have great interests, like maybe they do play a lot of sports, right? Or they are in art or theater or music, know how to play instruments, right? It doesn't mean that their life is defined by diabetes. It just means all it
Right.
means is that they have to just be more careful about how they use their sugar. They have to be careful about taking insulin, making sure they have their insulin injections if it's, especially I know with type 1, right? Like all it means is they have to just make some modifications
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and that they can still live a life. Same thing, autism. All this means is you just have to be, people just process things a little differently. They look at the world a little differently. They may not understand social cues right away, right? But you know what? Don't be surprised because a lot of them can pick up on energy,
Yes.
right? But that doesn't necessarily mean, right? They may not pick up on social cues, but they will pick up on your energy. And they also know when they're not getting treated like everyone else. They know this.
Absolutely. So you became a therapist, you have a podcast, and you wrote a book. So let's talk about the book because to me, I think that's so exciting because it puts your whole energy into it.
Well, it's funny because you have your podcast called Avoiding the Major Special. Mine is actually called Dropped in a Maze. And it talks about the social and emotional challenges, some of what we discussed on here today, pre and post diagnosis. I share about um, complications of what it's like to also be a first generation Indian American on the autism spectrum. I talk about useful tips and tools that I've learned along the way of navigating this maze. And I provide that for people as key takeaways that people can incorporate into their own lives.
and tell me about the podcast.
So my podcast is called On the Spectrum with Sonia. It's available on all audio platforms. We discuss autism spectrum, mental health challenges, and highlight stories of anybody who's overcome any adversity so that people can be left feeling with connection, hope, encouragement, love, especially in a world that tries to disconnect us on a daily.
And I think it's important for those listening, especially if you are a parent or a family member of someone on the spectrum. Um, Many of us get bullied as much as the individual with the diagnosis. Um, I know when my son was diagnosed, again, he was 6 years old. One day, he was very active in school. I was active in PTA, had a lot of friends. Within a short period of time, nobody wanted their kid to play with my kid, and nobody wanted to socialize with me. And my husband and I, let's see, he was in first grade, so probably until he got into college, realized that we had no social life either. Our son didn't have much of a social life, and neither did we. And that's when I finally came out of my shell and said, this is not fair. Number one, he's entitled to a social life, and so are we. And we we don't have a label. He doesn't either. In fact, just like you, I think if somebody met you on the street, they'd have no idea that you were on the spectrum. My son is very lucky. He is working in sports where he's always wanted to be. He lives on his own. He's very, very mature, very capable. And yes, does he still have some issues? Yes. But you know what? We all do. We all have issues. So
Absolutely.
we have to come together and be understanding and stop pointing fingers. And I think might begin by reading Sonia's book because um, she grew up in an era where nobody knew what was wrong, and they treated her as if it was all about her, and it wasn't.
And I'm, happy that advancements are being made now so people don't have to suffer in the same way. Like, people even older than I did, right, had to suffer who had autism spectrum. Many other women who are older than me. I'm going to be 43 this year. But there are people who are older than me that didn't get diagnosed until they were in their later years. And they too had to they probably struggled just as much, if not more, right, than I did, right? And I think that I'm glad that at least for upcoming generations, it's getting a little better. But I mean, bullying is still happening though, because I'd hear stuff from people that I work with who are in middle school, and people have said this before, where people would make fun of people who are with autism in their schools. People use the word autism in a derogatory way now, like how they used to use the R word, back in the 90s, especially, right? They're using that with autism now in some places. And I tell my clients, please keep using that word autism to help destigmatize the word and educate people. Because a lot of places now, they are not even using that full word. They're using tism now, which I really don't like. I want them to use the full word. I want people to say autism, not tism, because tism is really not a word. Autism is the proper word,
Absolutely.
right? I just feel like I want people to keep using that word, to keep advocating it, because how do we stop stigma is by continuing educating it, using that word, right? Using words to educate and empower others and enlighten others. The more we shy away from something is the more we keep promoting stigma.
Exactly. Well, I want to thank you for joining us today, and we're going to have all your information in the show notes. And I hope people will go out and read your book, follow your podcast, and reach out to you with any questions that they might have.
Well, thank you very much. My book is available online on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Strand Books, Goodreads. So you could find it just anywhere, dropped in a mace. And yeah, I really hope that, people who um, are able to get their hands on my book will really enjoy it. I think that it's a really great story. I think it's a great book, and I think a lot of people will, benefit from it. And the reason I wrote this book, it's not just for my own merriment, but rather I wanted this to be this book is dedicated for those on the spectrum. This book is dedicated to also Team Up Autism Speaks. Um, because I started running marathons several years ago, and Autism Speaks allowed me that outlet and a platform to become a person whom I can love. And this book is really for anybody who's been touched with autism in any way, shape, or form, whether you are married to somebody on the spectrum, whether you have children on the spectrum, whether you yourself are on the spectrum, whether you're an educator, occupational therapist, speech pathologist, therapist, you know, those who work with autism, right? This book is amazing for also these kinds of professions as well.
Well, thank you again. Have a wonderful day, and we wish you the best.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you very much. Take
Thank you.
care.